A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. Cleopatra VII, final pharaoh of Egypt. Look, you can't prove to me that she never said so. Breath of the Wild 2 just got delayed, and that's actually a very good thing. In every single trailer we've seen, there's been something missing, something rather alarming that could lead to the failure of the sequel of one of the most important games ever made. The sequel to Breath of the Wild faces a problem, and to understand that problem, we have to go back a few years. So we all know the impact Breath of the Wild had, not just on the Switch's launch, but on the gaming world at large. But if you can believe it, it's actually been 5 years since that game came out, and while that doesn't make any sense at all, it remains true. Regardless, just like Breath of the Wild changed the world the year it came out, naturally, games have continued to evolve since then. Now, don't misunderstand, I love Breath of the Wild. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and depending on the day of the week, it might even be my favorite. But the gaming landscape has changed a fair bit in the past 5 years, and Nintendo can't just re-release Breath of the Wild. The sequel needs to make some substantial changes and evolutions to what was one of the most innovative games we've ever seen if they want to stand out in today's gaming landscape. The team at Nintendo is now competing with the likes of Elden Ring, a game that many consider to be FromSoft's magnum opus, and a game that I personally believe may be the best open world game ever made. Games like Horizon Forbidden West, which tragically got overshadowed by another genre-defining open world. It's not 2017 anymore, and if Breath of the Wild 2 wants to stand up to its contemporaries, it's gonna have to make some big changes. Throughout every single Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, all 2 of them, we've yet to see something that's a staple of the Zelda franchise. What made Breath of the Wild so incredible was that truly free ability to go anywhere and do anything. It was the open world game that we've always dreamed of, but it was lacking something. It lacked traditional Zelda dungeons. While it did have 4 dungeons, they certainly weren't the Zelda dungeons of the past. Now, I think there's an entire discussion to be had about whether or not these dungeons were better or worse than traditional Zelda dungeons, but that's not what this video is about. See, one of the biggest problems with Breath of the Wild is the lack of things like the Forest Temple or the Fire Temple. I mean, just imagine getting to the top of Elden Volcano, throwing on a fire-resistant tunic, and gliding down into a small cavern that leads into this giant temple. The fact that we don't have proper temples and dungeons like that was by far the biggest disappointment of the original game. And while it was allowed to slide 5 years ago due to the massive changes this game made to the series and open world games in general, people are expecting bigger discoveries like this in their second journey through Hyrule. Similarly, the combat in the original game was like nothing else before it. It was fun, it was fresh, it was goofy. It was just a great system to mess around with. But now that it's been 5 years, people are expecting more depth, more skill, more options. 3 weapon types just aren't gonna cut it this time. And that is why this delay is so important. In delaying this game, they may be using the extra time to add more dungeons or perfect the dungeons that they've already made. They can expand on the combat, add more enemies, the list goes on and on. Thanks to Nintendo not desperately trying to rush this game out as fast as possible, they're giving the team the time they need to create a true successor to one of the best games ever made. They're giving Breath of the Wild 2 the chance to surpass a masterpiece. Now, I talked a lot about how games have gotten better over the past 5 years, but what about the past few decades? Well, that's what this video is all about.